A single carrier strike group burns more logistics in a day than most militaries move in a week. 17,000 meals, hundreds of thousands of gallons of jet fuel, plus nonstop resupply, repair, and coordination stretched across thousands of miles of water. And that's just keeping one formation operational. That's the part most people miss about America. 5,000 miles of open ocean don't care how powerful you are. Every empire that tried to pressure the United States ran into the same assumption, that power decides outcomes. But they collide with something far older than power: geography. But before America had a military, it already had a defense system. 2 oceans, 1 self-sufficient continent, and a map that soaks up pressure before it can cause damage. And for 50 years, every attempt to break that system has failed. Politicians can't negotiate with that. It sets the boundary conditions. And that's exactly where the Middle Eastern ambitions run into a brick wall. It pivots on oil, choke points, and proxy armies. The regional navies are built for confinement, coastal waters, narrow straits, and short-range engagements. These tools are lethal in this kind of environment, but they're functionally useless in the mid-Atlantic. The moment a vessel leaves land-based air cover, they don't enter a battlefield. They enter a zone where the US Navy holds permanent home field advantage. This reality was put to the test during the 1980s tanker war. Regional actors tried to turn the Persian Gulf into a pressure point by mining shipping lanes. It was an attempt to raise a global insurance tax to force an American retreat. While the conflict caused spikes in premiums and temporary jitters in the supply chain, the violence stayed strictly confined to a box 7,000 miles from the American mainland. Regional actors harassed shipping in their own backyard, but they had zero capacity to extend that pressure beyond it. US forces maintained the flow of traffic in the Gulf, while the American interior remained completely insulated. The conflict proved a point. Middle Eastern naval power is regional. They can make the Gulf dangerous, but the Atlantic and Pacific, untouchable. Today, that buffer is even stronger, reinforced by technology that makes surprise increasingly difficult. But force isn't the only thing that travels across an ocean. There is no element of surprise when the gap is 3,000 miles wide. The ocean turns the distance itself into a permanent defensive shield. But the oceans are part of the fortress. To find the real heart of the defense, you have to look further inland. But when it comes to hitting America, the most obvious pressure point isn't actually military, it's energy. One choke point carries a fifth of global oil flows, the Strait of Hormuz. You've heard about it a lot. Closing it doesn't just disrupt supply, it shocks the global system. But that shock doesn't land where it's aimed. Prices rise all over the world, but Europe and Asia feel the brunt. Import-dependent countries. America, however, has a level of safety that didn't exist 20 years ago. American refineries and American production don't perfectly sync up. Washington essentially built a global energy loop that it can exit at any time while its rivals remain locked in. By sitting at both ends of that system, the US gains price leverage no regional actor can replicate. If you have oil, you can sell it on the global market. But the United States now has the physical pipelines and storage capacity to keep itself running even if the Middle Eastern supplies are cut off. The US also produces large amounts of natural gas, which can be frozen and shipped as a liquid. In a crisis, that gives the country extra leverage, resources that can act as a buffer for its allies. While other nations scramble to keep the lights on, American production can ramp up to stabilize supply. The clearest example of how this system once threatened America is the 1973 oil shock, when prices jumped from $3 to $12 almost overnight. The response was shale, storage, and supply chain diversification. The vulnerability became infrastructure. Today, even a disruption like closing Hormuz raises prices rather than halting supply. The US gets about 8% of its oil from that region, meaning the impact is far less direct. Gulf nations risk more damage to their own economies than to America. It's still a lever that can shake the world, but it can't break the system. If oil can't break the system, the next move is to raise the cost of staying in it. Direct conflict fails, so then the strategy shifts. The most common tool used in the Middle East to fight a superpower isn't a huge army or a long-range missile. It's indirect pressure, proxy warfare. Hezbollah, Hamas, Houthis, militias. By giving money and weapons to smaller groups that are detached from regional governments, nations create an uneven fight. This strategy is meant to avoid a direct war with a stronger military by causing a slow, constant bleed. These groups can stop ships or attack military bases. They don't try to defeat America, they try to exhaust it. Cheap drones, improvised attacks, constant friction to make any conflict expensive. Every time a cheap drone is shot down by $1 million missile from a US Navy ship, the math works in favor of the proxy. It turns defense into a costly grind. They can raise the cost of presence. During the Beirut Barracks strike in 1983, a local group used a truck bomb to kill 241 American service members. They proved they can sneak past regular security lines and cause a massive amount of deaths on a target. America was dealt a terrible human tragedy, and the military was forced to leave that part of Lebanon. But if you look closer, that attack revealed a strategic plateau, a point where the power of a small group simply hits a glass ceiling. The victory was only local. It did not cause American power to fall apart. It didn't follow the United States back to its own shores. And it didn't stop America from using its strength anywhere else in the world. The strike proved that proxies can bleed the edges, but they can't touch the core. That story hasn't changed since. If you can't reach the territory, and you can't sustain pressure, the last option is to target the system itself. The United States has a massive shield built into its economy. Most major powers in the world are specialized, which makes them easy to break. They either have to buy almost everything they need from other countries or sell everything they make to keep the lights on. The American economy is different. It works like a giant loop that mostly feeds itself. If trade with the Middle East stopped today, it would cause a lot of noise in the stock market, but it wouldn't be enough to destroy the core of the country. The strongest part of this shield is how global money is wired. Because the US dollar is a global currency, the Federal Reserve and the US Treasury sit in the middle of almost every deal made between countries. This gives America a digital reach that goes far beyond its borders. If it wants, it can cut off the money for any group or country trying to cause trouble. And the power of this digital shield was evident in 2012. After pressure from the US and Europe, the SWIFT system, the network banks used to communicate, cut off several major Iranian banks. No navy, no missiles. It was a digital exclusion from the global financial system. The impact was immediate and severe, restricting Iran's ability to move money internationally and tightening pressure on its own economy. Iran's oil exports plummeted by roughly 40% in 1 year, reaching their lowest level in decades. Overseas banks in Riyadh, Abu Dhabi, and other Gulf nations hold trillions in US dollars. Every transaction involving those dollars eventually clears through American financial infrastructure. Washington built the pipes the money flows through. Since all these deals eventually have to pass through the American clearing system, or CHIPS, the US effectively has a kill switch on the money used to fund regional groups. If a country in the Middle East tries to affect the dollar, they just end up making their own savings worth less. It's like a financial standoff where both sides can get hurt, but the US is the one with its finger on the trigger. Money is a powerful weapon, but it's useless if your enemy can turn off your bank account with one click. Starting in November of 2026, the SWIFT system will require much more detailed structured information for cross-border payments. This makes it even harder for hidden networks to move cash without the US Treasury seeing it. And because the US hosts the world's deepest financial markets, pressure doesn't break the system. It just gets absorbed. When smaller economies get hit, currencies crash. When the US gets hit, the flows just reroute and the people trying to hide the money get exposed. If a country in the Middle East tried to hurt the US by selling large amounts of US government bonds, they would run into a liquidity trap. The market is so deep that even a coordinated sell-off will be absorbed by other investors seeking safety. The seller will be left with few alternatives for parking capital at scale. In practice, that makes broad economic attacks on the US extremely difficult to sustain. A trade war or an embargo might hurt profits, but it can't knock down the walls of the nation. Even so, this shield is under some kind of slow pressure. Other countries are trying to build their own systems to bypass SWIFT. They're testing the strength of the dollar, but economic pressure is only one layer of the system. The massive farms in the Midwest produce enough food to feed the entire country, with surplus left over to export to the world. The huge size of the American river system adds a second wall to the country's defense. Even if ports disappear, the interior doesn't fall apart, it just reroutes. A single Mississippi River barge can carry as much cargo as 15 hopper cars or 60 to 70 semi-trucks. But the real point is not capacity, it's continuity. These inland waterways allow the country to sustain supply chains even if every coastal port were shut down. The heartland can reroute distribution through internal routes that no foreign navy can easily block. Disruptions can be absorbed, while other nations see their trade stop at the water's edge. This came from decades of investment in better seeds, irrigation, and industrial agriculture. Oceans make invasion difficult. Internal rivers make transport cheap. It produces its own energy and grows more food than it consumes. And in financial terms, it sits at the center of global capital markets. While regional actors in the Middle East can cause disruption, they're operating against geography that is structurally resilient. This is a fortress by default, a continent built to keep functioning regardless of external pressure. But even a system this stable can begin to show cracks. As technology changes, the gaps in the walls are starting to show. Hypersonic missiles can move so fast that the oceans feel smaller. While the US is ramping up its defense system, Russia has already demonstrated these weapons in combat, and China is heavily testing them. They don't arc predictably across the sky. They skim the horizon. The warning window that once brought America minutes now buys seconds. But hypersonics aren't even the most disruptive shift. Cheap drone swarms are. A single operator can now deploy hundreds of low-cost drones that overwhelm point defense systems. Not because they're sophisticated, but just because they're numerous. The Houthis demonstrated the deadly math of this concept in 2023 and 2024, launching waves of drones and missiles at Red Sea shipping. The US Navy was forced to use million-dollar interceptors against targets that cost a few $1,000s each. Every intercept costs more than the drone it destroys. The math that made America's missile defense credible was built around expensive threats. It wasn't built around dozens of devices launched simultaneously from cheap mobile launchers hidden in the desert. And unlike hypersonics, drone swarm technology is already proliferating. Iran supplies them, North Korea is developing them. The barrier to entry is low enough that non-state actors are already operating them at scale. What started as a Middle Eastern tactic is becoming a global one pretty quickly. And cyber attacks, those aren't contained by oceans. They can hit power grids without needing a ship or plane. There's a physical version of the cyber problem that's even harder to defend. 95% of international data, financial transactions, military communications, and intelligence traffic travels through undersea fiber optic cables. There are roughly 400 of them crossing the ocean floor, and they're largely unmonitored, difficult to defend, and easy to cut. Russia has already been caught positioning submarines near cable routes. A coordinated cutting campaign doesn't need to penetrate American shores. It just needs to sever the connections that make the financial system function. The dollar's power depends on the infrastructure carrying it. That infrastructure sits on the ocean floor with no guards. And the slow move away from the US dollar by other big powers is a test of the financial plumbing that has protected the country for so long. China, Russia, and the Gulf states are building payment systems designed to bypass SWIFT entirely. Saudi Arabia has already accepted non-dollar oil payments. Dollar dominance was never a law of nature. It was a consequence of American power and the absence of alternatives. The alternatives which are now being built, slowly, deliberately, and the timeline is measured in decades, which is exactly why it doesn't make the headlines. These threats don't look the same. Some are technical, some are physical, but they share one quality. None of them need to cross the map to cause damage. When energy was the problem, it found shale. When trade was the problem, it moved its supply chains. You don't break that kind of system directly. You wait for it to become something else. The Middle East ran into the same wall every adversary runs into. Not American power, American geography. And that's non-negotiable. Thanks for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you want to see more videos like this, then please consider subscribing and turn on notifications. It really does make a difference. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time on MatPack.